When you look at a math equation, there's this expectation of pure, unbroken logic. 2 plus 2 is 4. It's clean, it's universal, and there are absolutely no exceptions just because, happens to be a Tuesday.
Right. It's a closed system. You learn the formula, you apply the formula, and you get the right answer. It's deeply comforting in its predictability.
But then you step into the world of English spelling. You stare at a word like phlebotomy or, even just night, and that beautiful mathematical logic completely shatters.
Oh, totally. It just falls apart.
And if you're currently studying for a nursing entrance exam like the TEAS or HESI A2, or maybe you're charting a patient's medical history, mixing up one letter in a chaotic English word isn't just a funny typo. It can be the difference between a patient getting the right medication or the wrong one entirely.
Yeah, it's the absolute definition of high-stakes linguistic muddy waters.
Okay, let's unpack this, because if you have ever felt like English spelling is just chaos masquerading as a language, our sources today prove it actually has a secret code.
It really does. There's a method to the madness.
Right. So whether you're prepping for a critical exam or you're just someone fascinated by how language works, our mission for this deep dive is to get past the frustration. We're going to unpack the hidden logic, the bizarre history, and the life or death stakes of getting words right.
To start, we really need to establish what we actually mean when we say spelling rules, because they aren't laws of physics. They're systematic patterns that dictate how spoken sounds, what linguists call phones, are converted into written letter sequences, or graphemes.
Phones to graphemes, got it.
Exactly. But there's a crucial distinction we have to make right out of the gate. Linguists separate prescriptive rules from descriptive patterns.
Prescriptive rules being the rigid stuff we were forced to memorize in 3rd grade, like always do it this exact way no matter what.
Exactly, the rulebook approach.
Yeah.
But descriptive patterns are the messy, statistical realities of how English is actually spelled out in the wild.
So they have exceptions.
So many exceptions. And that's because English is what we call a deep orthography.
Deep meaning, like layered, like an archaeological dig.
Precisely layered. If you look at a language with a shallow or transparent orthography, say Spanish or Finnish one letter, almost always equals one sound.
That sounds so nice.
It is. It's a highly reliable one-to-one relationship. You see the letter, you know the sound. But English absorbed vocabulary from Old English, Old Norse, Norman French, Latin, and Greek. It layered multiple historical logics on top of one another.
Just piling them on.
Right. So an English spelling rule is less like a mathematical formula and more like a strong statistical tendency that, well, comes with a known failure rate.
Okay, I get the historical layering, but I have to push back a little here. To understand why this matters, we first have to bust the biggest misconception of all, which is that English spelling is entirely random.
It really feels that way sometimes.
Right, because when I look at a word like night with a completely silent K and a silent GH right in the middle, it feels like somebody just threw Scrabble tiles at a wall.
What's fascinating here is, well, we actually have hard empirical data proving it's not random at all. We have to go back to 1966.
Okay, 1966.
Yeah. A landmark computerized study was conducted by Hanna, Hodges, and Rudorf for the U.S. Office of Education. And you have to picture the technology of the era. This wasn't a modern laptop running a quick script. They were using massive, room-sized IBM mainframe computers.
Wait, so they were physically feeding the English language into a machine using punch cards?
Yes. They took roughly 17,000 common English words, coded their sounds and spellings onto physical punch cards, and ran them through this giant machine.
Oh.
They wanted to see if spelling could be predicted purely by rule-based programming. They were testing the phone-to-grapheme rule set to see if a computer could successfully spell words if it only knew the rules, without memorizing a dictionary.
And what happens when a 1960s supercomputer tries to spell English?
The results they got were stunning. They found that a little over 50% of words could be spelled absolutely perfectly using only those base rules.
Okay, 50% is a failing grade in school, though.
True, but it gets better. If you allowed for just one single error per word, like getting one vowel wrong in a long multi-syllable word, that predictability shot up to between 85 and 90%.
Wait, really? 85 to 90% of English spelling is completely predictable?
It's mostly rule-governed. The language actually works. The feeling of randomness comes from a very specific, small minority of words.
Let me guess, it's the words we use all the time.
Exactly. The remaining 10 to 15% of irregular words are the ones we use constantly. Words like of, said, one, does. They're highly visible, extremely high-frequency words.
So believing English is random is like thinking a city has no traffic laws just because you keep noticing a few locals constantly running the same red lights.
That is a perfect analogy. The rules are functioning beautifully for the vast majority of the traffic, but those few exceptions zooming through the intersection are very loud, very dangerous, and very visible.
Okay, that makes sense. But if 85% of the language is following the traffic laws, where did that rule-breaking, chaotic 15% come from? Who exactly is running the red lights here?
History. English wasn't designed in a sterile laboratory. It accreted over centuries of chaos. To understand why words look the way they do, we have to look at the timeline.
Let's do it.
So let's start before the year 1066. Old English was actually spelled fairly phonetically. They used a runic-influenced alphabet that mapped pretty cleanly to sounds. But then, 1066 happens, the Norman Conquest.
The French arrive.
Yes. French-speaking scribes take over the administration of the country, and they start respelling English words using French conventions.
Because they couldn't read the English ones?
Or they just didn't like them. They looked at some of the Old English letters and essentially found them aesthetically unpleasing. For example, the Old English word for queen was spelled C-W-E-N, quen.
C-W-E-N.
Okay.
The scribes changed it to Q-U-E-E-N to match French habits. They also started shoving the letter U into words like house. It instantly created a mismatch between sound and spelling that never fully resolved.
Hold on. They just decided CW wasn't chic enough, so they threw a Q in there and ruined the phonics for everyone? Pretty much. And that was just the first blow. Then we jump to 1476. William Caxton brings the printing press to England, but his printers were mostly Dutch or Flemish immigrants.
Okay, more outside influence.
Right. And they didn't care about English phonetics. They cared about typesetting mechanics. They started standardizing spellings, sometimes literally just to make a physical line of metal text fit neatly into a column.
You're kidding.
No, I mean, if a line was too short, they might add an E to the end of a word. If it was too long, they might drop a letter.
I lost points on a spelling test in 4th grade because a 15th century Dutch printer wanted his page margins to look pretty.
I'm afraid so. And the timing of the printing press could not have been worse. It froze these slightly weird, margin-justified spellings in place right before a massive phonetic event called the Great Vowel Shift.
I have heard of this. What exactly was shifting?
Think of the printed spelling like a house built on top of a tectonic plate. The written word stayed exactly the same. But between roughly 1400 and 1700, the foundation, the way we actually pronounce the long vowels in our mouths, slid to a completely different latitude.
Wait, how does a whole country just decide to shift its vowels without changing the spelling? Did everyone just wake up one day and decide, hey, sounded different?
It was incredibly gradual. It took about 300 years, driven by complex sociological changes, migrations into London, and shifts in class dialects. Take the word name. N-A-M-E.
Okay, name.
Before the shift, it was pronounced closer to na-a. You actually pronounce the E at the end.
Not hey. Okay, so the spelling matched the sound perfectly.
Exactly. But as the pronunciation slid forward in the mouth to name, the spelling simply never caught up. That tectonic shift is the primary reason why English has so many silent letters and why our vowels don't map cleanly to sounds anymore.
So we've got French scribes, Dutch printers, and tectonic vowel shifts. But what about the really bizarre, unnecessary silent letters, like the B in debt? D-E-B-T. I mean, there's no B sound there at all.
For that, we turn to Samuel Johnson. In 1755, Johnson published his famous Dictionary of the English Language. He was making the first major attempt to fix correct British spellings into one authoritative reference.
Well, that sounds like a good idea.
It was, but Johnson and the scholars of his era strongly favored etymological spellings. They wanted to honor the ancient Latin and Greek roots of words, even if it meant ignoring how people actually spoke.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, so he deliberately inserted or kept the silent B in det to honor the Latin root debitum.
You're telling me Johnson prioritized a dead language over how actual people spoke English?
In a matter of speaking, yes.
Yeah.
English speakers never pronounced that B, but Johnson cemented it in the dictionary anyway to preserve its history. These historical layers are exactly why word spelling encodes its history, not just its sound.
But wait, if history made spelling this massive, layered mess, someone must have tried to fix it, right? I mean, we reform laws, we update technology. Did anyone try to just rewrite the dictionary to make sense?
People certainly tried. The most famous success story is Noah Webster. Between 1783 and 1828, Webster deliberately simplified and Americanized British spellings in his dictionaries.
Oh, right. American spelling versus British spelling.
Exactly. He dropped the U from color to make color, changed center to center with an ER, and changed jail to jail.
Oh, wow. Jail used to be spelled G-A-O-L, right?
Right. And this wasn't just to make reading easier for kids. It was a calculated act of post-revolutionary cultural independence from Britain. Webster wanted a distinctly American national identity, expressed even in orthography.
He was basically sticking it to the British through the dictionary.
Pretty much.
But Webster was just one guy, and he only changed a few endings. What about a complete logical overhaul?
That is where we see spectacular failures.
Uh-huh.
Fast forward to 1906. Steel magnate Andrew Carnegie funded a group called the Simplified Spelling Board. They proposed changing about 300 common words to highly phonetic spellings.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, spelling, though, as THO, or through as THRU. President Theodore Roosevelt was actually persuaded to order the U.S. government printing office to adopt these new spellings in all official documents.
Teddy Roosevelt, the Rough Rider taking on the dictionary. What happened?
Absolute revolt. Congress and the press mocked him mercilessly.
Oh, no.
Yeah, the newspapers had a field day, printing articles in exaggerated phonetic gibberish to make him look foolish. It was so politically damaging that Roosevelt was forced to rescind the order within months.
But why the massive backlash? If reformers like Carnegie and Roosevelt just wanted to make reading easier for struggling learners, aren't the preservationists, the people fighting the changes, aren't they just being elitist by keeping the old confusing rules?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the preservationists actually have a very profound argument. They argue that etymological spelling preserves meaning. Let's look at the word sign, S-I-G-N.
Okay, sign.
It has a silent G. If you just spell it S-I-N-E to make it perfectly phonetic, it loses its visual connection to the words signature, where that G is lightly pronounced.
Oh, I see. Sign and signature are visually linked on the page, even if they sound different.
Exactly. They belong to the same word family. Same with muscle and muscular. The C in muscle is silent, but it connects it to muscular, where it is spoken. Changing the spelling severs those historical and semantic ties.
That actually makes a lot of sense.
It does. The Roosevelt episode proves that correct spelling is largely a matter of social consensus and shared visual history, not pure logic.
Plus, if we changed it all, we'd have to reteach the entire adult population how to read again. Though, didn't they try something like this with kids in the 1960s?
Yes, they did. The initial teaching alphabet, or ITA, developed by British linguist Sir James Pittman, it was a 44-symbol phonetic alphabet. The theory was to use this beautifully transparent system just to teach young kids the mechanics of reading and then eventually transfer them to standard spelling.
Let me guess. The transfer was a disaster.
Total chaos. Early results looked promising for initial reading speed, but the transfer phase when kids had to suddenly learn standard English spelling caused massive confusion.
I can imagine.
By the 1970s, it was mostly abandoned. Both ITA and Roosevelt illustrate the exact same lesson. Making spelling logical and making it socially adoptable are two completely different engineering problems.
So Roosevelt failed because standard spelling is protected by fierce social consensus. But in the medical field, it's not just social preference, it's a rigid, gate-kept system. If a nursing student takes the TEAS exam, they can't exactly argue etymology if they drop a letter. How does a student navigate a system this stubborn?
By understanding that English spelling is constantly balancing three competing principles. First, phonetic representation, spelling it like it sounds. Second, morphological consistency, keeping a word part spelled the same way across related words. And third, etymological preservation, keeping the source language's spelling.
Sound, word parts, and history.
Exactly. Most so-called spelling rules are just attempts to resolve conflicts between those three forces mechanically.
All right, let's get into the mechanics then. If a listener is prepping for an exam, what are the core rules? And more importantly, why do they work? Let's start with Rule 1, the silent E, or, the magic E rule.
This is one of the more reliable mechanical rules. When a word ends in a silent E, like hope or care, you drop the E before adding a suffix that begins with a vowel. So hope becomes hoping with no E.
Right.
But you keep the E before a suffix that begins with a consonant, making it hopeful.
Why do we drop it for a vowel suffix but keep it for a consonant? Like, what is the actual mechanism there?
It's about protecting the preceding vowel. In hope, the E reaches over the P to make the O say its own name, a long O.
Okay, got it.
When you add ekin, the I can do that same job. It reaches over the P to keep the O long. You don't need the E anymore. But if you add beeful, the F is a consonant. It can't make the O long. So you have to keep an E there to do the job.
So for a nursing application, that means a word like excise, which ends in E, drops that E when it becomes excision with an I, because the I takes over the job of keeping the vowel sounds correct. That's really cool. What's next?
Rule 2 is the 1-1-1 doubling rule. When a one-syllable word ends in one vowel followed by one consonant, you double that final consonant before adding a vowel suffix. So stop becomes stopping with two P's. Run becomes runner with two N's.
And mechanically, why are we doubling the consonant? Like, what's the purpose?
Think of the doubled consonant as a physical wall. In the word stop, the O is a short vowel. When you add the suffix ing, that I wants to reach backward and change the O into a long vowel.
Which would make the word stoping.
Exactly. By doubling the P, you build a two-brick wall that the I cannot reach over. The short O is protected.
Oh, that makes so much sense. The extra consonant is literally a physical barrier protecting the short vowel. But earlier you mentioned a trap with multisyllabic words.
Yes, and this is a classic standardized test trap. For longer words, the doubling depends entirely on stress. If you take the word occur, the stress falls on the final syllable, cur. Because that syllable is heavily stressed, you need the wall. So doubles to occurred with two R's.
But what about a word like offer?
In offer, the stress is on the first syllable, of. The second syllable, fur, is unstressed. When a syllable is unstressed, the vowel naturally reduces to a lazy sound called a schwa.
A schwa. Okay.
Right. And because it's already reduced, it doesn't need protection from the incoming suffix. So you do not double the consonant. It becomes offered with just one R.
That is incredibly sneaky. Occurred has two R's, offered has one, purely because of where we emphasize the sound when we speak. The stress dictates the wall. Okay, what about the most famous rule of all? I before E, except after C.
I'm afraid I have to debunk that as a universal rule.
Really?
Yeah, it's taught everywhere, but it's deeply misunderstood. The traditional rhyme only applies when the sound being produced is the long E sound, like in believe.
Wait, so if the word doesn't make an E sound, the rule doesn't even apply. What about words like science or sufficient?
Exactly. In science or sufficient, the C and the IE combination are producing different sounds entirely, so the rule says nothing about them.
Huh.
But even within its proper domain words, with the long E sound, it has massive, famous exceptions. Weird, C's, foreign, and protein all break the rule. They have the E sound, they don't follow a C, but they're spelled EI.
So learning I before E as an absolute rule is like being told it never rains in summer. I mean, it's a helpful default for July, but you're still going to get drenched eventually.
Precisely. It is a statistical tendency, not a guarantee. However, for test prep, here is a genuinely useful tip. The word receipt, do-E, follow the rule perfectly. E-I after C. Keeping that in mind helps you avoid a very common misspelling on exams.
That is a solid tip. But let's bring it back to the clinical setting. We've laughed at the Dutch printers and Teddy Roosevelt, but spelling isn't about winning a middle school spelling bee. We mentioned at the start that it's a matter of patient safety.
Absolutely. A misspelled drug name or anatomical term is not a cosmetic error. It is a critical safety issue. The Institute for Safe Medication Practices actually tracks this. They have a documented category of medical error called LASA.
LASA.
Yeah, look-alike, sound-alike, drug confusion. If you misspell a medication on a chart, a patient could easily receive the completely wrong drug.
And prefixes, too, like mixing up hypoglycemia, which is low blood sugar, and hyperglycemia, which is high blood sugar.
Right.
That is a one-letter difference that completely reverses the treatment plan. It can cause real harm.
And then there are homophones, words that sound identical but are spelled differently. This is where spelling rules matter most for meaning because pronunciation won't help you at all.
Do you have an example?
A classic nursing anatomy example. Ilium, spelled with an E, is the lower part of the small intestine. Ilium, spelled with an I, is the upper part of the hip bone. You have to know the orthography.
That sounds great in theory, but piecing together thousands of anatomical terms under the time pressure of an exam sounds just as stressful as memorizing a dictionary. How intuitive is it really? Do students just have to brute force this?
This raises an important question, right? How do you study a system this deep? And the answer is decidedly no. You do not brute force the dictionary. This is where morphology, the study of word parts and etymology, become your ultimate cheat code.
Cheat code. I like the sound of that.
Medical vocabulary doesn't follow arbitrary English rules. It's built from a small set of Greek and Latin roots, prefixes, and suffixes.
Okay, let's test this. Walk me through a scary-sounding medical term. How does a student break it down mechanically?
Let's take the word gastroenteritis. It's 16 letters long. It looks terrifying on a flashcard. But if you know the roots, it's just 3 pieces. Let's break it down. Gastro is the Greek root for what?
Stomach.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Enter is the root for intestines. And itis is the universal suffix for inflammation. So what is gastroenteritis?
Inflammation of the stomach and intestines. Okay, I see it. It's not memorizing a 16-letter word, it's just snapping 3 Lego bricks together.
Exactly. There are roughly 200 of these core word parts. If you learn those building blocks, you aren't memorizing thousands of separate words. You're recognizing the architectural logic of the language. When you see bradycardia, you know brady is slow, and bradycardia is heart. You can spell it and define it without ever having memorized that specific word. It is a highly leveraged strategy.
Instead of fighting the chaotic history of English, you're just bypassing it entirely by using the Latin and Greek architecture. That makes so much more sense. Okay, let's recap everything we've covered today. We've seen that English spelling is a deep orthography. It's stacked with layers of history, from French scribes deciding letters weren't chic enough, to Dutch printers messing with margins, to Noah Webster's American Rebellion.
Quite the lineup.
Yeah, but beneath all of that, it is ultimately rule-governed, balancing sound, meaning, and history.
And those underlying rules are more powerful and present in our lives than we realize. Modern autocorrect and spell check tools don't just use a digital dictionary. They're actually built on statistical models of the exact phone-to-grapheme correspondence rules that the 1966 HANA study quantified on those punch cards.
That's crazy.
Your phone understands the deep mechanical patterns of English spelling better than most of us do.
Which brings us right back to that math equation we talked about at the very beginning. We want spelling to be this closed system, binary, right or wrong. But it's not a formula. It's an archaeological dig. It's murky and it's messy, but there's absolute treasure there if you understand the patterns.
Well said.
Which leaves me with one final unexplored thought for you to ponder. If our modern autocorrect algorithms are trained on these historical rules, what happens when AI completely takes over the writing process? Will spell check simply enforce the ghosts of 15th century Flemish printers forever? Or will artificial intelligence eventually force the spelling reform that Teddy Roosevelt couldn't? Keep digging, keep questioning, and if you are taking those exams, good luck.